Throughout its 150 plus year history, the world of college football has seen some of the most controversial moments in all of American sports. Whether it be off the field scandals that wrecked entire programs or on the field controversies that changed the outcome of some of the sport's biggest games, the world of college football has always had a very close relationship with controversy and scandal. So today, we're going to take a look back at a few of the biggest on-field controversies in college football history, and we'll give them a final judgment as well as hopefully dispatch of some of the insane arguments that were made at the time to cover up for some very bad decisions. Looking at you, Ohio State fans. So without wasting any more time, let's get started. We'll start with Oklahoma versus Oregon in the infamous onside kick game. It was week 3 of the 2006 season, and the Ducks were hosting the Sooners in an early season undefeated top 25 showdown. Coming in, the game was expected to have big implications as both teams had very high expectations entering the season. Oregon looked to be the better team early, with their offense being able to move the ball relatively well while holding the Sooners' offense, led by star running back Adrian Peterson, to just 6 first half points. But then, the second half came around and Peterson started to do Peterson things, while the Ducks' offense meanwhile went off the rails, turning the ball over 3 separate times, each of which would result in Sooner points. These key events would help Oklahoma build a 13-point lead entering the final minutes of the game. The Ducks would finally cut the lead to 6 with just over a minute left, but having burned through all their timeouts and time not being on their side, Oregon would be forced to go for an onside kick. An onside kick that would go on to become one of the most controversial moments in college football history.
Buggy wants to kick it to the left side now, and Oregon shifts over there.
Now let's break this down. Oregon attempted a high bounce onside kick. However, the ball wasn't struck well enough, which helped lead to Ducks wide receiver Brian Pasinger clearly touching the ball before it had traveled 10 yards. Somehow, 7 different officials all claimed to have missed this very obvious violation. But they weren't done there. They then compounded on their original mistake, if you can even call it that, by not properly sorting the pile, instead opting to rule that Oregon had recovered the football. This was in spite of the fact that an Oklahoma player had clearly recovered the ball, and he was multiple yards away from where the officials had ruled the ball had been recovered, celebrating what should have been a Sooner victory. They made this ruling in spite of the fact that they never saw an Oregon player possess the ball for even a single second, while simultaneously ignoring the guy who had the ball the entire time. To make things worse, the play was even reviewed by 2 replay officials up in the booth, and they somehow decided to stay with the call on the field. This would all somehow get worse a few moments later by a sketchy pass interference call that I would argue shouldn't have been called in the first place, but definitely should have been rescinded after they went to replay and saw that the ball was clearly tipped at the line of scrimmage. Again, Oregon would go on to score the game-winning touchdown just a few moments later, and the entire OU fanbase would collectively feel the robbery that had just occurred in broad daylight. Now, in the aftermath of the complete debacle that was the 06 Oklahoma-Oregon matchup, the Pac-10 had a lot to answer for. After all, the way the officials handled the final minute of this game went far beyond just incompetence. This wasn't just a few referees making a bad call. This was 9 different referees who botched 2 separate plays and multiple replay reviews in favor of one team over the other, and there's really no other way to look at it. Now, I won't go as far as to allege that game fixing actually occurred in this particular situation, but the fact of the matter is, the 9 officials who participated in this game made multiple egregious errors that go far beyond just incompetence. How far you choose to go with that is up to you. So how did the Pac-10 respond to the very integrity of the game being made a mockery of by their officials? Well, they suspended all 9 of them. For just one game. Nothing more, nothing less. Almost 20 years later, this is still considered one of the biggest officiating blunders in college football history. And while the final minute of this game is incredibly controversial, it shouldn't get lost that the Pac-10's response was almost just as bad. The punishment for making a mockery of the integrity of the very game that they were supposedly there to protect was being suspended for one single weekend. That fact alone makes this one of the most controversial moments in college football history. However, in their defense, had the officials made the correct call on the onside kick, we may have missed out on one of the greatest highlights in college football history. Next up, we head to the desert for the most controversial championship game of the BCS era. It's Miami versus Ohio State from the 2003 Fiesta Bowl. Now, unfortunately, this game is remembered for its very controversial ending, but in my opinion, it should be remembered for what it really was, and that is one of the best championship games of the BCS era. Miami were the defending national champions, and despite losing multiple future All-Pros to the NFL, they returned a legendary squad that was still littered with future NFL talent everywhere that you looked. They were in the final years of one of the greatest runs of their time, and they were not going to let the U go out with a whimper. Meanwhile, the 2002 Buckeyes were in hot pursuit of Ohio State's first national championship since 1970. It was year 2 of the Jim Tressel era in Columbus, and he had his vision for the program in full effect. His Buckeyes were led by their legendary defense that had held opponents to an average of just 13 points per game. If there was anybody out there that could stop the runaway freight train that had become the Miami Hurricanes offense, it was right here in Scarlet and Gray. These two Titans would face off on January 3rd, 2003 from Sun Devil Stadium. The story of this game was fairly simple. Miami was the better team for most of the contest. They had more success moving the ball, and their defense prevented the Buckeyes from really putting a great drive together. However, the Ohio State defense etched its name into history on this night with an absolutely outstanding performance. They forced turnovers and got all of the big stops when they needed them, and in the end, Miami would need a 40-yard field goal as time expired just to force the infamous first overtime. Miami's lethal offense would strike first to start overtime. This meant that the Buckeyes would need a touchdown of their own just to force a second overtime. After somehow surviving a 4th and 14, the Buckeyes would find themselves facing another 4th down with the game on the line. And this is where one of the most controversial plays in college football history was born.
Fleuret's up there as a wide out too. The ball goes into the end zone and it is incomplete. Intended for Gamble. Now there is a penalty flag thrown.
Now there's a lot going on here, but we're just going to talk about the route and the supposed penalty. So there's basically two arguments that you can make in favor of this being a penalty. First, we have the hand fighting that you see here. Now in my opinion, there is literally nothing here that is penalty worthy. As someone who despises how soft pass interference and defensive holding have gotten called in the current game, I cannot stand this being called a penalty. The reasoning is quite simple. Both the wide receiver and the defensive back should have the right to jockey for position, and that's literally all that you see happening here. In fact, I would argue that the most impactful contact that you see in this clip is the swipe that happens at the top of the route, but I don't in any way consider that as penalty worthy either. Next, we have the final moments before the ball arrives, and again, I just don't see anything here that's worthy of a penalty. There's virtually no contact before the ball arrives. The contact that you see takes place well after the ball has already arrived. The fact that the ball was so incredibly inaccurate is the entire reason that this play even looks suspicious. Now maybe I'm wrong, but based on the route and the way the wide receiver turns back for the ball, it looks as though he's expecting the ball to be thrown at his back shoulder. Instead, the ball is nowhere near the intended target, which makes Chris Gamble desperately lunge for the ball. Now let's talk about referee Terry Porter, who threw the flag a solid 5 seconds after the play had concluded. Now I will give him the benefit of the doubt because he is seeing this from the back pylon. So from his view, I can see how this looks like Sharp is physically preventing Gamble from making a play on the ball while not having his head turned around. But when the group conversation happens, he should have been overruled as multiple other officials had a better view of the space in between the two players prior to the arrival of the ball. Plus, if we're being honest, Porter's sensationalized tossing of the flag a solid 5 seconds after the play concludes, where he is literally posing for the cameras, is beyond pathetic, and no doubt it helped add to the speculation that there was some fuckery afoot. Ultimately, the Buckeyes would go on to end the game in the second overtime with their own legendary goal line stand putting a final stamp on the matter. But looking back on this game, while the ending is incredibly controversial, we should all be able to agree that the most deserving team on that night was the team that won. Miami simply made too many mistakes, they lost the turnover battle, and when they had their chances to end the game, like with the 4th and 14 for example, they could not come through. Plus, there was this defensive holding penalty that was not called that would have slimmed their chances to force overtime in the first place by quite a bit. And you could also make a pretty solid argument, in fact I would actually make the argument, that this should have been ruled a completed pass anyway. So while Miami fans are right that the pass interference call was bogus and a complete deviation from the way that the rest of the game was called, the most deserving team, which was the Ohio State Buckeyes on that night, was the team that walked away with the win and somehow the only title of the Jim Tressel era in Columbus. Next up, we have the infamous 5th down game between Colorado and Missouri. Now entering the 1990 season, Colorado had very high hopes. After all, they were coming off an 11-1 season where their only loss came to Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl, but their season got off to a rocky start with a tie against Tennessee in the season opener and then needing a last-second touchdown to stop an upset bid from Stanford 2 weeks later. But then, in their 3rd game of the season against a 21st ranked Illinois squad, the upset that they had been flirting with all along had finally arrived. The Buffs would show their resiliency though by earning 2 ranked wins in the following weeks over Texas and Washington. This brings us to week 7 against Missouri, who were in the middle of a very rotten period of their history, having not seen a winning season in 7 years, and they were gonna wait 7 more to see another one. But on this day, with the home crowd at their back and a nationally ranked opponent in town, the Tigers were highly motivated to pull the upset. And the key to pulling that upset was going to be the long ball. It was there all day for the Missouri offense, leading to multiple long-range scores throughout the day. But in the final minutes, the Tigers would throw a bit of a change-up, hitting a screen pass that would be executed to perfection, giving Missouri a 31-27 lead with just 2 minutes and 30 seconds left in the game. With time quickly running out, the Buffs would begin what they hoped to be a legendary drive in school history, which it was. The Buffs would use their lethal rushing attack to get themselves deep into Missouri territory, along with a few timely passes from quarterback Charles Johnson as well. Suddenly, the Buffaloes found themselves looking at 1st and goal from the 4-yard line with just 31 seconds left on the clock. Now 1st down would be used to spike the ball since Colorado had already used all but one of their timeouts. On 2nd down, the Buffs would turn to star running back Eric Bieniemy, who would get them 1 yard away from the end zone before hitting a brick wall, leading to Colorado using their final timeout. Now to 3rd down, and as you can clearly see at the top of the screen, as of now, the correct down is currently displayed on the down marker. The 3rd down play would see Bieniemy hit yet another brick wall as he tried to leap over the pile. With the clock still rolling, the Colorado offense would hurry up to the line, and as they get ready to snap the ball, look at the top of the screen and the down marker has not changed. It is still stuck on 3rd down. Colorado would then snap the ball and spike it again, meaning that this should have been ruled a turnover and Missouri would have been a kneel down away from a massive upset. but instead everyone just continues on as if the previous play was actually third down. The referees, commentators, and even the Missouri sideline never caught on, despite there being a decent amount of time in between plays that should have allowed for reality to creep in somewhere. But it didn't, and on the following play, backup quarterback Charles Johnson would lunge for the goal line and be given the game-winning touchdown. This would incense Missouri fans and players who invaded the field to scream directly in the ref's face and take out a little frustration on the goalpost while they were at it. But it wasn't going to change the outcome. Colorado had scored the game-winning touchdown on a play that never should have happened and somehow walked out of Columbia with a 33-31 victory. Now let's start with the obvious, which is that the officials really screwed this thing up. Now in their defense, the Bieniemy run on third down and the spike on fourth down happened very quickly, with the clock continuing to roll the entire time. But that defense quickly falls apart under scrutiny because they had a ton of time in between second and third down, with Colorado using their final timeout to get on the same page and make sure that everyone knew the details of the situation. This was just a massive failure on their part to simply do their job. I don't believe there was really anything nefarious with what the officiating crew actually did here. Now there is a bit of a conspiracy theory out there that the person holding the down marker, who did turn out to be a Colorado University alum, was the one ultimately responsible, or at least partially responsible, for what had happened. After all, he clearly does not change the down marker from third to fourth down. And look, maybe he did it nefariously, I don't know. But he's not the one that's ultimately responsible for what happened here. That responsibility would fall on the officiating crew, who created one of the biggest controversies in college football history. And the game-winning touchdown play is controversial in and of itself, not just because it was a play that shouldn't have happened, but many Missouri fans think that Charles Johnson didn't actually reach the goal line. Now it's hard to tell because there's no definitive angle that gives us a clear shot of the goal line and the ball crossing or not crossing. But from this angle, it does kind of look like he stretches the ball out before his butt touches the ground, which likely means that the ball did cross the goal line before he was officially down. Now this whole 1990 season for Colorado was mired in controversy from beginning to end, starting with their wins over Stanford and Missouri, and then continuing on with their Orange Bowl victory over Notre Dame, where thanks to a very questionable clipping call, the Buffs were able to hold off the Irish and get their revenge, as well as a share with Georgia Tech of the 1990 National Championship. So with that, thank you for watching, and make sure to drop your favorite controversial college football moments in the comments below, as I'm sure I'll be doing many more of these in the future. I'm Trash Monkey, and I'll see you next time.